The hour has come, everyone, and I'm so glad to see all of you. And it's our last session. I know, and this has been a fabulous series. And every week is different, and every week is exciting in its own way. And I don't know, I've just been really thrilled with the whole program. And camera. And thank you very much for being here. I'll turn it over in just a minute to our inveterate moderator and our threesome panel here, but let's just have a quick word of prayer. Lord God, we do thank you for this day and for this night and for sun shining on the tops of the trees after the rain and a rainbow. And we ask that you would be with us this evening, as always, and open our minds, inspire our hearts, and blessings to everyone who's here. Amen. Amen. So we have Wayne, our wonderful moderator. We have Madison Van Veelen. We have Chelsea Benham. We have John Reining. And they all have their own special stories to tell. And as always, Wayne has surprised us. Did everybody get a copy of the outline for tonight? Oh, you'll want to do this because we all said we just don't know where the Song of Solomon piece came from.
We need another one here.
Oh, okay.
Has this been every week, or is it a new?
No, sometimes. We just never know.
There's no pattern, Chelsea.
But the Song of Solomon, it just comes and goes.
The Song of Solomon, yeah, it's nice that it's making a little ripple out there in the group. Welcome to the Writer's Mind, the Reader's Heart. Good to have you. Barb is certainly right. These sessions are all special in their own way, and tonight will be that way. We have Lake Fellows. They are roundly loved and appreciated here at Second Church, and for good reason. And these three have volunteered to talk to us a little bit about their call in connection with a very good book. This book is, like some of them we've looked at, it's not recent. It's not a 2015 book. It's 2009. It's Odd and Wondrous Calling, Lillian Daniel and Martin Copenhaver. It's really terrific. Two of the three Lake Fellows read it a while ago. Chelsea, I think, has just finished it or getting into it now. But it's worth your time, whether you're a minister or not. You know the old saying in churches that there's a priesthood of all believers, that we're all ministers. And in some way or other, what you hear tonight from the three Lake Fellows should echo a bit, should vibrate a bit in your own life with respect to your own sense of what God is calling you to do and be these days. This gives you the order of things. On the back of your sheet, you will see a little paragraph on each one of the Lake Fellows, giving you a little idea of where they're from. I've kidded with some of them. I was born in the South, and so I learned quickly that question, where are you from? Has a kind of resonance to it that I think is really true for all regions. It's really important to know what your place of birth you have nothing to do with. It's almost like infant baptism. The powers all around you are in control. And your place puts its stamp on you, as it has on all of us, and it certainly has on our Lake Fellows. This gives you a little idea of what their place was, and so they may speak about that later, and they may not, but at least you'll know a bit about their place of origin. All right. Call is a mysterious thing. And one of the best books in the Bible to learn quickly about it is the Song of Solomon. It's an outrageously good and underused book. Sometimes the laughing in a group about the Song of Solomon is laughing about not knowing it's in the Bible in the first place. It is, and it is, of course, a love story. But most of the ancient readers of the story, and certainly many of the modern ones, see its other meaning, at least one of its other meanings, as a book about the love of God for Israel and for the elect and for the Christian community as a whole. I'm going to read selected quotes here, one from the 7th chapter, taking the stance of one gender, and then from the 2nd chapter. Listen now for the kind of love of God for a person that is characteristic of every single call. Every one. Not just for ministers, but for all people of God, all God's children. How graceful are your feet in sandals, O queenly maiden. Your rounded thighs are like jewels, the work of a master hand. Your navel is a rounded bowl that never lacks mixed wine. Your belly is a heap of wheat encircled with lilies. Now switch to the 2nd chapter. It's a different gender talking. As an apple tree among the trees of the wood, so is my beloved among young men. With great delight I sat in his shadow, and his fruit was sweet to my taste. There's eros in there, and for most, I think, theologians of this book and theologians of our church, there's a dimension of this kind of love in probably the most amazing thing any Christian ever talks to another Christian about, and that is the love of God for God's people. Okay, listen for that, because I think you'll hear it. The hurdle for most of us. America is, I would claim, and I got a lot of help on this one. America is probably the most individualistic country the world has ever seen. And there's a good side to that, but there also is a kind of puzzling side to it. We think of things in individual terms that we needn't. Calling is one of them. This is a quote now from one of the essays, one of the first essay in this Odd and Wondrous Calling about calling as corporate, calling as communal. In fact, it's one of the most relaxing things you can find out about calling. That it isn't about you alone. It comes to you all right, but it comes to you along with people around you. And here's a nice little run on how that works. Somehow God calls us into practicing our faith together. Not so that we will all march in lockstep, but so that we will move like a dance troupe, in which each one of us contributes a somewhat different step to the unfolding work and beauty. Practicing our faith is like a dance. And when I think of how all our callings come together, I think of this. There's a woman, this is a pastor writing, there's a woman in my church who suffered a stroke, from which she is gradually recovering her ability to speak, but she doesn't have it back yet. But the last thing to come is our names. Church people visit her, and she can speak to us in ways that indicate she knows exactly who we are and has known us for years, but she cannot speak anyone's name. Instead, she pulls out the church photo directory. She has a photo directory with it. She pulls out the church directory. And if you're from the church and you come in that room, she waves it at you. That lightweight book full of carefully posed photographs of church members. Now, here's a little ministerial run on church directories. People outside the community might make fun of those church directories where we all take turns sitting in front of the same strange backdrop of dark swirling clouds, family members trying to smile at the same time. But to those who know one another, these photos are full of meaning. A cheerful Christmas sweater does not distract us from the pained smile of the recently divorced. Missing family member points to grief that the whole community endured. A newlywed's swelling tummy pulls us toward promise, while the childlessness of another family photograph in yet another year reminds us to keep praying. When one of us from the church walks in to see the woman whose speech is failing her, she waves that sacred church photo directory at us, as if to say that she does not know our names, but she knows the way in which we all are related. She may have forgotten our names, but she knows us as we truly are. Calling works that way. Calling does come to you, and there's a real challenge, but it never comes to you alone, ever. The record of Scripture is clear on that from Genesis to Revelation. Now what I'd like to do is go to our Lake Fellows, and I've asked them not only to answer, but to pay enough attention to what the other Lake Fellows are saying so that they can comment on each other. I think one of the fun things about Lake Fellows is listening to them talk to each other about ministry and about what's going on in the church. So I've encouraged them to do a bit of sideways talking so we can listen in on them as well. I've asked all of them to think about the one big takeaway from this book. They all agree it's good, but maybe they won't say it in quite the same way. Madison, let's start with you and just go down the row. What was your... Yeah. What was your... In fact, we can give you... Yeah, put the mic right close and make sure that you get picked up. What's the main takeaway for you from this book?
I think for me, this is a really meaningful book to read. I love it. I highly recommend it to all of you. It's very entertaining and funny and sentimental and serious at other points too. But for me, I really loved, and a lot of this comes even from the first chapter, Lillian writes about holy appreciation and holy presence, which is another way of saying or drawing attention to that which is very ordinary and sometimes that which we overlook. But if we look closely, we can see and feel the presence of God. And just looking at the book overall, there's such an appreciation for ministry, but not viewing it through rose-colored glasses. I mean, there's real discussion of the challenges too, but you come away from it feeling like, well, with a renewed vision for that holy appreciation for this calling that we're all engaged in. And, she talks about how chaotic it is, and I think she uses a phrase that ministry it's the chaos that only Jesus could organize into a calling. And I think that's so true. And it's hard to appreciate it on some days. Some days it's harder than others. But this book is just a beautiful reminder that God is in all of those mundane and profound moments, and we just need to have the holy appreciation for it.
Let me say something real quick. Yeah, I think one of the really unusual things about the book, and the authors pick it up right in the beginning, is that most of the books on ministry are really kind of tough going. They admit quickly that it's a hard job, and then they tell you how to do something. How to organize, how to do mission, how to preach, how to teach, something like that. This book is different in that it does mix in a lot of hard stuff, but like Madison was saying, there's the joy in ministry just comes up over and over again, and I hope it rings true to you guys because it rings true for me as well.
And actually the term she uses, more often she uses holy imagination. I was remembering that wrong. So really looking for the holiness in things, and sometimes that takes a little imagination, but it's there.
Absolutely.
The way that the authors reflect on ministry in such joyful ways, as Madison was saying, but also wrestling with the really hard topics, just brought up for me this sense of kinship with them, like, oh, these are things I've experienced too. And that's one of the great things about being a Lake Fellow here, is that we have such a large ministerial staff, and we have each other, in which to confide and talk about what we're experiencing, and how it feels for us. And there's this wonderful chapter that Lillian writes. She began her ministerial career as a young woman, and being a young woman myself, I really resonate with her voice. And in this chapter, she reflects upon her first internship in seminary. She was 23 and working as a chaplain intern at a mental hospital. I don't remember where. But she kept saying to her supervisor, I need a collar. I just need these people to respect me. Would they respect me more if I was ordained? And she's having all these authority issues and really feeling very self-conscious, which I remember going through when I was doing my internship at a hospital, wondering how people saw me. And I still go through that sometimes, but she works through it with the help of her supervisor. And I really, I just felt like, oh yeah, I've gone through that too. I'm not alone in this, and calling can be hard, and it is communal. And she talks beautifully about how she needed the people. Her supervisor kept telling her to go and just talk to the people, go and talk to the patients. And after finally doing that, they saw her as the person who was caring for them. And what she needed to do was the practice of ministry rather than taking on the authority. And so calling is communal, but there's this self piece too that we struggle with. And her story, I think, highlights that we need mentors to help us, that it's normal to be worrying about all these things and questioning yourself. And so for me, I just felt comforted by that, and happy, I guess, at peace that I read that story and thought I saw myself there.
Chelsea, again, I'm gonna just break in here. What I'm doing, I want you to do after a while. I'm responding to them, but the idea here is to get everyone into a conversation with the Lake Fellows. So feel free. Just raise your hand and we'll get you going. You mentioned in the beginning about becoming a Lake Fellow. How did that happen? How does one become a Lake Fellow? How did a Memphis girl end up a Lake Fellow at Second Church?
I'm not sure how far back. Do you want like my story or the logistical story of how you apply to be a Lake Fellow?
The second.
The second. How the logistical story? Okay, so there's an application process. I forget when they were due. January, maybe?
January, yeah.
Yeah. I think every year Bev sends out to the different Presbyterian seminaries and other seminaries as well notice that we're accepting Lake Fellows, and we got that notice at my seminary.
Which was?
Louisville Presbyterian Seminary, where Madison and I both went. Filled out an application, turned it in, got a call for an interview. The interview weekend is held in March. It's a long, not super long, but it's a whole weekend of things. Yes.
Beth knows.
Even when you think you're not being scrutinized or evaluated, you really are.
And it's a strange
We don't know.
experience because there's usually five people that are here, and you're all here at the same time, and you're supposed to be friendly with each other, but you're competing for the same two positions, right? So you're constantly eyeing the other people up and making comparisons.
Sizing them
well,
up.
that person's out, so we're fine here. But you don't want to be mean, right?
Yeah. And there's a whole committee of, there's the Lake Fellow Committee, Beth is on that committee, of wonderful people, and so they host several events, and there's an interview, there's really a round of interviews that Saturday morning with David Barry, Karen Lang individually, Lewis individually, and then with the members of the committee. But there's also a dinner that night with a larger number of the committee and spouses that is informal, but like Madison said, you're not really, you're trying to be very cute, like, you know, and talkative and engaging and.
You don't want to push your peas with your fingers.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Wait. Scott has asked me to really use the microphone, so pass it around.
It's really intensive for, give them credit if they survive that weekend. Because that evening is very informal, and it's usually it's in a home and it's a dinner, and we ask them to move around. We move around so you don't eat, or don't stand with the same people that or eat dinner with the same people you've had hors d'oeuvres with, and so forth. So we try to move around, and you get a sense of, for the staff and for us, it's a sense of how they are socially, and that, because that's a big part of our church. You have to be, there's one thing to be able to preach and to, do the functions of a minister, but be able to relate to people. In a doctor, we call it bedside manner. And so I think that's what really we seek. And it may be somebody in the morning that just kind of blew you away in the interview. That evening you think, oh my gosh, this is not, or vice versa. Somebody that you weren't particularly impressed with or that didn't really stand out in the morning, then by evening. And of course the Lake Fellows spend Friday night with them, so they have their opinions. And their opinions are very weighty in the process too, because So I think one thing that I'll say about the process is that the program has a reputation, and because of previous Lake Fellows, like Madison was at Louisville, and I'm sure Chelsea knew that Madison was a Lake Fellow here, and for a long time most of the Lake Fellows came from one or two. They came from Princeton mainly, and then
It happens.
and we've tried to get away from that, but anyway, so I think the program has gotten a reputation, and former Lake Fellows will say, recommend people, that you need to look at this person or tell somebody you need to apply for this program. And so I think, and professors, I think, do the same thing, encourage students to apply, and that they know will be, so it's not hard finding candidates for the program. I don't know how many applications Lewis gets, but at one point we had to go through 25. They wean it down a little bit so we don't have to go through all those, but, a large number of applications. And of qualified people, so. Okay, I'm sorry.
No, thank you, Beth.
Are you here for a year?
The program is 2 years long. She asked how long the program was.
Okay.
I'll reiterate for you. So you asked how long the program is. It's technically a 2-year program. Yeah. I say technically because I'm an exception to the rule. I'll be here for 2.5 because of Canada. Homeland Security thought I was suspicious.
In school we call it retained.
Retained, yes, I was held back.
Canadians are always special.
Thank you. I think that's a good thing. I get to be here for 2.5 years. I'm really excited about that. So.
You all.
You were having trouble with your visa, but
Yeah, I did. Homeland Security held back my application for an extra 2 months, and so the entire process took 8, which was just a little ridiculous. But that is their department. Immigration is under Homeland Security. So.
I'm glad you got in before today.
Me too.
Not taking it.
How long are you here now? I mean,
My
we get the full 2 years though.
my contract is slated to end the same time Chelsea's is, so August 2017. Madison finishes August 2016. We're 2017.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Were you gonna say something?
You all mentioned that the Saturday night dinner that's part of the interview weekend, and I was kind of laughing to myself because I remember when I came to interview, and we went through that dinner, and you mingle with everybody, and we were getting ready to leave, and I was talking to Beth, just saying, thank you for this. This has been wonderful. And meanwhile, people are coming up to her and handing her slips of paper, and I'm thinking, what is going on here? And then I keep watching people come up to her, handing her these pieces of paper, and I realize they're voting. So there was my confirmation that this was not just a socializing dinner.
That process has been discussed, and it's going to be a little more discreet in the future after Madison's story. Beautiful. Yeah. No, it is a fun weekend, and I got to help Madison and I got to host it or help host it last year, and when Chelsea and others came, and it's a lot of fun.
Well, then on Sunday, tell them what happened on Sunday.
Oh yeah, so on the Sunday of the weekend, they leave on the Sunday evening, give or take. But Sunday morning, they get to participate in the morning worship, and they come to we try to get everybody to go to a class and to one worship service. And then they get to do lunch with Lewis somewhere. Usually it's the country club, but yeah, so they get to experience church. Last year it was the weekend that Mayor Ballard was in town, and by in town I mean in the building, and so they got to stay for luncheon with Mayor Ballard. There were opinions.
Vicky's trying to tell me something. My wife usually has great ideas. Yes, ma'am.
So now, are you ready to share with us your takeaway from the book?
Sure. So there are times when I'm an overachiever, and there are times when my brain is scattered, and then I get both of those combined. And so I have a list of things that I took away from this book because it's just that good. So I encourage you to read it. One of the things I loved about this book is how often I could, like Chelsea, stand back and say, this is great, this is what I've been feeling, and it's in writing somewhere. Things like shaking people's hands after worship on Sunday morning. You have 90 seconds and you hear everything that's happening in someone's life in 90 seconds or less, and then you move on to the next person, and you do that again. And then you'll have 5 people where you smile and nod and wave and whatever, and then you'll have it again. And then you have to remember all those things. So those kinds of stories where, we are all called to ministry, but those are very unique to ministers. Those stories pop up, and those are moments that I love this book. And then hold on to that thought. And then there are moments that I can stand back and say, we're all called to ministry. There are days when you're talking with a friend and they're trying to figure out if they want to go to church or if they don't, and your relationship will change depending on how you communicate with them about your faith. And so that's a thing. That's something we have to acknowledge. And so in that sense, we've all got these things. We're all ministers in one sense or another. You go and visit a friend in the hospital. You are a chaplain to that person in a moment. You are an angel for that person in that moment. And so there's 3 or 4 stories that relate to going to the hospital, being in a psychiatric hospital, things like that. So there's a lot of things that I love about this. One thing that is unique for me, as opposed to these two, they're both married. I'm not. So dating is a really interesting experience for me. There's a chapter in here about being married to the minister and a chapter about being married to the pagan. And this is something that I read both of these and kind of stand back and say, so, what does this mean for me? These are things it's good for me to read because I can stand back and say, depending on who I marry someday, Lord willing, that will impact my relationship with them, and that will impact my spiritual life as well. So it's an interesting conversation for me to have and to be able to read, to figure out if I'm married to someone and they don't have that connection to God, they don't have that spiritual life, what does that mean for our marriage, for our relationship? That's a level that I won't be able to connect with that person on. And so if that is a relationship I enter, I have to mourn that loss in advance of even having it. And so that's something I think about when I go on a first date, because that's what you need to be thinking about on a first date, right? It's also really interesting to be a minister and going on first dates. You know how they say, avoid politics and avoid religion on a first date or something, or when you meet someone? No, by the end of the first date, we've talked about politics, we've talked about religion, we've talked about everything else, because it's a downward slope. But yeah, so that's that. What else do you have a question for me?
Question for John?
Yes. No?
Where
Okay. Oh, who has the mic?
Okay.
Oh, in the back. Okay.
Vicki has the mic.
Well, have you tried saying that you're a lawyer and seeing how that goes?
You know, I went through a phase while I was in.
There's a chapter in there about that.
Right,
Sure.
Right.
I
The
was
same
about to
one you're
mention
talking
that.
about.
When I was in seminary, I told people I was studying education because I was. I have a Master of Arts in Christian Education. And so for a good solid year of my seminary experience, I was focusing on teaching and human development. And so I can hold that conversation real well. And so I did that for a while. But that's disingenuous, and also, what a wonderful way to start a potential relationship, right? Let's start off with a lie. That ends well. So yes, I did have that, and I have decided against it since then.
Well, in the book, you know, I think Martin who does that says when it went well being a lawyer, and then it just didn't. And it didn't go well the first time, and then she noticed. I guess it was she, whoever the author noticed that it was it was a very serious and deep spiritual reflection and discussion that they had that would have never happened if the person had said, "I'm a lawyer." So that's kind of what it's up and down, isn't it?
Absolutely. Have you guys had experiences of that, like introducing yourselves to people, strangers, and like, I'm a minister? How that goes?
All the time. I mean, my husband, Eric, is a teacher, and actually we met in seminary, so he is seminary trained, but he's not in ministry now or working in a church, and so most of his colleagues are around our age, and, you know, we do things with them socially from time to time. Most recently, we went to a Halloween party that one of them hosted, so, you know, I'm standing there in my Dorothy costume with my rum and Coke in my hand, and one of his coworkers, who I don't know at all, I had never met previously, asked the inevitable question, "So what do you do?" And, you know, I take a different route than what Martin does, because he talks about how when they would go on vacations, he would take on the profession of his wife for the duration of the trip, because he knew it well enough to be able to sort of bluff, you know, through it. But I tell people, "Oh, I'm a pastor at a Presbyterian church," and there's always this moment where I'm kind of holding my breath and waiting to see how that person will respond.
That
You
could
really
be a curse or a blessing.
never know. You know, and it's I've gotten a little bit of everything, but there is a certain awkwardness and apprehension around it.
Last week, we had a goodbye party for Nick Eisen for the class, thanks to Rod and Judy. And he brought his girlfriend, and she's just darling. And we were in the kitchen talking and asking how did they meet and so forth. And she said he, right away, you know, very early into the date, that first date, said, "There's something I need to tell you." And she thought, he's married, he's got 5 kids, he's, you know, da-da-da-da-da-da.
Worse than that.
And he said, "I just graduated from seminary." And she, oh, you know, she was so relieved. But then we laughed and talked about how he said a lot in that statement. You know, he really, he was telling her a lot in that one statement. It was very cool.
Absolutely. I didn't enter the pastoral ministry until relatively late in life. I was a teacher for a while, but then when I did, I've had the classic barbershop experience. I don't know whether any of you have listened to this happen, where you've got 3 or 4 people lined up in barber's chairs, and the chatter. And usually the chatter eventually gets to the point where you're asked if you're having your hair done or cut, what you do. I try to avoid it. I talk about baseball or about the weather or something, but if I cannot avoid it, and I say I am a minister, there is a absolutely deathly silence. It's a version of what happens at a lot of parties or a lot of social gatherings, except in the barbershop. It's so evident. You're in one place, you can't move. Neither can your barber, so you just kind of hold a, wow, that's nice, and then you try to move back to something else. The conversation never goes anywhere after that. So, you know. Well, yeah. Yeah, so. Yes.
I think it has the drawback of every profession. I think there are limitations because I was a teacher, and people would always say, "Oh, what did you teach?" And when I said English, ooh, then they don't want to speak a word. But I had an experience with my neighbor one day. She and another lady were out in front as I was pulling out of the garage or out in front, getting ready to leaving for church. And they said, "Oh, you look really nice. Where are you going?" And I said, "Oh, I'm headed to church." And that's another conversation killer, you know. And they said, "Oh, something about you're such a good person." I said, and I said, "No, that's why I go to church." I'm not. And so, yeah, and I said, "No, I need church because no, I'm not because I need church," or something like that. But I found those, you know, those awkward positions. So it comes, if it's any consolation, it comes with every profession. I'd like for you to speak about, you know, first of all, what do you anticipate in the future? You know, have you thought about a single pastorate or a co-pastorate, or, you know, with it? Does Eric have any aspiration to be ordained, or you know, have you thought about, and how are you going to work out that two career session?
Down the table, get started.
And then with John, I want you to tell about your future too.
Madison, you start.
So the question is broadly, what's next?
Yeah, just kind of
What do we
think-
envision?
From your experience here, what appeals to you?
Okay. Well, I think in the most broad of terms, I know that I want to be in parish ministry, at least in the foreseeable future. At this point, I don't see myself in a solo pastor role, but, you know, I'm not one to ever rule anything out because, you know, that saying about when you make your plans and God is laughing or whatever. But I do think I'd really love to be an associate. I really enjoy the collegiality that comes with being on some kind of staff, even if you only have one other person you're pastoring with or whatnot.
Madison, do you want to be a specialist as an associate, or do you want to be a generalist as associate?
I think generalist is more my thing. You know, people ask me, well, what do you love in ministry? What's your thing? And I'm one of those people, I haven't really found anything that I don't like, and which I think is great in one way. In other ways, it's kind of frustrating because you want to be the person that's like, you know, has a thing.
Have you done lock-ins?
As a participant, not as a leader. Takes me back
Trying
to
to
my
find
youth
something you
days.
won't like, Madison.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe that'll be the day. So we'll really have to see. But as far as Eric, my husband, he's really happy doing what he's doing right now, teaching. And he's in a 2-year contract that he just started a few months ago. So even though I'll be done here at Second, you know, within the next year, we're still going to be in Indianapolis for a while. So that will kind of change my search for what's next because I'll be a little restricted to this area. But I'll think about pulpit supply, and there's some other kinds of opportunities that are sort of out there as possibilities. So we'll see.
Chelsea, where do you see yourself going? You're just starting, I know, but where do you see yourself going?
Yes, it's very early, so this may change. But I grew up in smaller churches. I have a really big heart for smaller churches, and I used to be, and still am, you know, considering but also terrified of being a solo pastor. And I still think that may be where I'm headed, for better or for worse. But
What's terrifying?
It is scary, and you know, that's part of the reason I applied for the Lake Fellows program, because I didn't want to be out in the world, you know, bright-eyed and idealistic and, you know, really excited, but also very, like, having to do it all by myself. And ideally it doesn't actually happen like that. You know, you have to find support, but still to be the person who is responsible, who is the staff, it's kind of a lot when you are sort of fresh in the world. And people do it, but I don't know. I was just, I don't know. Was there another half of that question? I forgot. Sorry.
You have another half. What's his going to be? Blake, what is he going to do?
Oh, yeah. My husband, Blake, taught for 5 years in the classroom, and he's working for IPS right now as a graduation coach. So he's basically a support staff kind of social worker. He's not trained as a social worker, but it's that kind of work, but also some data and really just trying to raise the graduation rate at this particular high school. So I don't know what will be next for him. He's pretty flexible, and I'm lucky in that regard, in that he's willing to move. But as we keep moving, I mean, his path keeps changing as well. So who knows what could be next.